It is a mystery to which all of mankind is seeking the answer. And in a world filled with trouble and violence, it has never been more relevant. Woven within the text of ancient documents and passed on through thousands of years of oral history, it's a thread that weaves together the past, present, and future. And it is about to be revealed.
If mankind can get a grasp of what we're talking about, then the whole world can change, because it's a supernatural message that holds the key to lasting peace, true happiness, and real fulfillment. And it can even reveal the future. It's all there to be taken hold of. And once you understand it, then virtually everything that's happening in the world begins to make sense.
What is mankind's purpose on earth? How can we fulfill our destiny and live the kind of lives God intended for us? And most important, what does the future hold? For most people, possessing the answers to these questions would radically alter their outlook on life and even their day-to-day existence. But where do the answers lie? Join us as we unravel a fascinating mystery, one in which clues can be found in the most diverse places imaginable, including the first book of the Old Testament, high on a frozen mountaintop in Turkey, and even in a scientific theory that has captured the attention of the entire world. But how can this supernatural message change lives? The answer lies in the scope of the message. For example, does the fact that many modern scientists are predicting another worldwide flood tie in with biblical end times prophecies? Could a fresh examination of the story of Noah's Ark shed some light on the possibility of this prediction coming true? What's more, could it help us determine if we are indeed living in the biblical end times? And is it possible that the biblical account of Noah's Ark might serve as a vital roadmap for the future, one that could benefit the entire world? Some biblical scholars believe the story of Noah contains the text of a supernatural message, one that is vital to mankind today. What is that message? And what hope does it hold out for the future of mankind? Join us as we uncover the startling connections between the distant past, the here and now, and a future that may soon be upon us. The Holy Bible. With the Old and New Testaments, there are 66 books, penned by some 40 authors over thousands of years. But is there one unifying message that permeates the entire Word of God? And how is that message especially relevant to the world today? Can it provide answers to life's most important questions? Things like, what is my purpose in life? How can I live up to the potential God gave me? And is there a way to make sense of what's going on in the world today? For Christians the world over, the Bible is looked upon as the ultimate source of information. And so our search for answers begins at the beginning, in the book of Genesis.
One of the greatest discoveries you can make is that the Bible is a message system. 66 separate books penned by over 40 authors over a period of several thousand years, and yet we discover it's an integrated message system in which every detail, every number, every place name is there by deliberate, skillful engineering.
If the Bible shows evidence of supernatural engineering, then is that same force at work in the world today? In short, is God in control? The easy answer for most Christians is, of course, yes. But then there are those times in life when circumstances close in upon us and seem overwhelming. Or we witness world events totally beyond our control and can't help but feel despair and even doubt. So where can we find hope in these darkest hours? And where is the evidence of supernatural engineering that can show us the fingerprints of the Creator? To find out, we must take a fresh look at one of the most well-known and beloved stories in the entire Bible, the story of Noah's Ark. Imagine having lived every day of your life in relative peace and stability. You and your family go about your everyday routine, working at various jobs, providing food and shelter, enjoying each other's company, and thinking all the time that things will continue just as they always have. Then you receive a powerful and disturbing message, one that would be totally unbelievable if it weren't from such a reliable source.
Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood.
In Genesis chapter 6, we're told that God spoke to Noah and told him he was going to bring a flood to the entire earth. But the flood, in terms of destruction, would not be absolute. Because Noah was a righteous man, God would save Noah and his family and form a covenant with them.
The Bible account relates that Noah obeyed God, and in so doing, he built the ark. The ark was appropriate to accommodate all of the living creatures, 2 of each kind, 7 of the clean kinds, his family, all secure inside, and then a global flood erupted. Noah obeyed in building the ark, and thus he, his family, and all the creatures taken on board were saved.
According to the Genesis account, the rain persisted for 40 days and 40 nights, and all the springs of the great deep burst forth. The waters increased and lifted the ark high above the earth, and all the high mountains were covered to a depth of more than 20 feet. After 150 days, the waters began to recede, and eventually the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat.
The story of the Great Flood is one of the best-known stories there is. Even people far removed from Christianity or Judaism know this story and know it well. And the story has tremendous spiritual implications as well. But the question is it based upon fact? That's the critical issue.
Is there any truth to the biblical account of Noah and the ark? And what about the spiritual significance of the story? Is God trying to send a message to the world today through this fascinating yet ancient account of a worldwide flood?
The Noah story begins with the biblical theme, the important spiritual theme of redemption. It's a cycle that begins and is repeated over and over in the Bible when it begins at the point of people rebelling against God and moving away from Him. God then sends a warning and gives an opportunity for people to repent. He gives them an opportunity for a way out, in fact. In fact, that's a good picture of the ark being a picture of safety. Now, for those who do not, there is a time of judgment, and judgment results in the punishment of wicked. And then the cycle starts all over again with people once again living in harmony with God.
The story of Noah is, in a manner of speaking, just the tip of the iceberg. As the Bible unfolds, we see God's message of redemption and grace presented again and again. For Christians, it is a beautiful picture. But for unbelievers, the story's message contains little impact. Why? Because they don't believe a word of it is true. The worldwide flood, they say, never happened. And if the flood never happened, then Noah never existed. Why have they come to such a conclusion? Because the prevailing theory of modern science supports this position. But is it correct? It all begins with the story of creation. The book of Genesis tells us God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Most scientists, however, have a different explanation. For the average person, the most convincing proof of the story's veracity could come in only one form: the ark itself.
Contrary to the critics, there does seem to be historical evidence of both Noah and the flood. 272 mentions to be exact, in virtually every civilization and culture around the world, including the Aztec and Inca cultures. There are many others: China, Persia, Egypt, cultures from all over the globe that have no contact with each other. And in every case, the story is the same. You have a flood, a large boat, animals, and a few select survivors. There are even artifacts dating back to antiquity that have been found on Mount Ararat. We know that the Chaldean high priest, Berosus, visited the site about 475 BC. He wrote considerably of the phenomenon he witnessed, stating that it was quite easy to discern the ark in its resting place high up on the glacier. Many famous men of antiquity made journeys to the awesome mountain. One of these was Iphanius, Bishop of Salamis in 360 AD. He was shown an already treasured relic of the ark, a well-preserved, identifiable piece of a sea-going vessel.
An Armenian prince reported about the ark being on Mount Ararat in 1254. He wrote, "At the summit a great black object is always visible, the Ark of Noah."
The renowned explorer Marco Polo in 1269 AD traveled near the mountain, and in his book, The Travels, he wrote that the remains of the ark still did rest on the snowy reaches of Mount Ararat. There have been a number of eyewitness accounts through the years, and just hundreds of people claim to have seen the remains of Noah's Ark. These were documented by prominent historians of the time and by these eyewitnesses.
In 1829, the Russian-born German physician Friedrich Perrott became the first Westerner to climb Mount Ararat. Prior to the climb, Perrott visited a cathedral in Soviet Armenia. There he was shown a cross which, it was claimed, was carved from wood it brought down from Noah's Ark in 318 AD.
It all gives credibility to the idea that the remains of Noah's Ark still do exist on that mountain in eastern Turkey.
Throughout history, it seems, everyone from well-known explorers to men of religion and even the merely curious have scaled the heights of snowy Ararat in an attempt to see the Ark. But have there been any sightings in modern times? Eyewitness reports come from varied sources and when compared show astonishing similarity. But unfortunately, the Ark, or what some believe to be the Ark, shows up in different places.
One of the first official government sightings came shortly after World War I, when a Russian pilot reported seeing a large, barge-like object on Mount Ararat. The Tsar of Russia took a personal interest, and an army of soldiers and explorers made their way up the mountain. But Tsar Nicholas was in the process of being deposed, and by the time the expedition returned, anything having to do with religion was being removed and destroyed. Unfortunately, the records and photographs of that expedition also disappeared.
As we have researched and studied Mount Ararat, we have located a number of sites that need to be investigated close up. Most of these are on the northern ice cap. We have a site called the Shalki Arzan site, the Garbe site, the Pelago site, the Crawford site, another site called the Ararat Anomaly. All of these need on-site investigation to be sure what is there.
The problem, it seems, is not in finding interesting anomalies on Ararat, but in trying to determine which of these sites might in fact be the Ark of Noah. So is there any additional evidence that would point to the authenticity of any of these finds? An intriguing discovery in the late 20th century may well hold the answer.
On the 28th of August in 1990, explorer Edward Crawford photographed parallel, straight cracks in the ice on the northern ice cap of Mount Ararat between the Abic 1 glacier and the Parrot glacier. These appear to match precisely a satellite photo image of a dark rectangular form in the ice. He believes that thermal differences and pressure difference of a rectilinear structure underneath the ice is the cause for this. In 1997, he was able to get a topographic map of sufficient quality to get the exact latitude and longitude of this site.
According to Crawford, the perimeter of the ancient structure is intact. There is evidence, however, that pieces of the upper part of the structure have fragmented and disappeared. It's impossible to say for certain. However, another intriguing piece of evidence has been found that backs up Crawford's claim.
Crawford also found on Mount Ararat ancient rock carvings in Proto-Sumerian script. The most important of these is called the Ahura Covenant inscription. Translated, it reads, God's sacrificial covenant of the sky-bright bow or rainbow. Go forth, procreate, be fruitful. This wordgram consists of standard Proto-Sumerian pictograms.
For true believers, it is a spine-tingling discovery, an ancient message inscribed in stone that directly relates to the Noah story. And even for those who are more skeptical, it certainly provides a compelling reason to return to Mount Ararat for additional research. But are these sightings of possible Ark remains enough to convince the skeptics that the story of Noah is true? And if the remains of the great ship are on Ararat, why hasn't anyone been able to retrieve them?
The problems that hinder the search for the Ark are manyfold and have existed down throughout the history of the search and still exist today. Especially, it seems, the lack of support by the government, both the Turkish government and the American government. Neither one of them seemed to really understand what would happen and the importance of finding the Ark to the world.
While the search for the physical remains of Noah's Ark continues on Mount Ararat, another search has already turned up amazing results. Could it be that modern science might actually be able to prove that the ancient account of a worldwide flood is true? And what if today's structural engineers could prove that the vessel described in the biblical account would not only be seaworthy, but that it could withstand such a deluge as the flood? Let's go in search of answers that may well rewrite history and create a new path to faith. For centuries, mankind has been trying to unravel the mystery of Noah's flood. Is it based in fact or merely religious fiction? Everyone from theologians to scientists, historians to explorers have taken up positions on the topic. Their views range from total acceptance based on faith alone to outright rejection based solely on the religious nature of the story. Let us suppose for a moment that there was a catastrophic flood at some point in ancient history. If this were actually the case, two very important questions must be answered. Is it even possible for the entire world to be covered with water? And if the Bible story is correct, wouldn't there be some proof of such an event in the geologic record? Our search for answers begins with the world's most complete source of information about the flood, the biblical account in Genesis. Could it be that hidden within this simple description, the answers to the skeptics' most difficult questions may be found? Having served as director of one of the United States Defense Department's major research and development laboratories, Dr. Walter Brown comes with an impressive list of credentials and credibility. In tackling the subject of Earth's geological development, Dr. Brown has developed a theory that contradicts the generally accepted viewpoint of the scientific community. Profound and far-reaching, this respected scientist's hydroplate theory not only offers a completely new approach to the geological sciences, it succeeds where the prevailing theory often fails. It simply and logically explains some of the Earth's most profound mysteries.
We can see on our planet 25 major features that can now be systematically explained as a consequence of a global flood that erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 30 trillion hydrogen bombs. This theory shows us just how rapidly major mountains form. It explains the coal, oil, and methane deposits, the rapid continental drift, and why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. This theory also explains the ice ages, and it gives the primary reason for global warming. It explains the formation of the layered strata in almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. Surprisingly, it explains the origin of comets, of asteroids, and of meteorites.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the Earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers, about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date, the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity appears to support the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But what other evidence exists to support this amazing theory?
In 1970, I predicted that large pools of salt water would be found beneath major mountains. That prediction has been confirmed in several ways, by gravity studies, by seismic studies, and by electromagnetic studies.
A paper published in the April 2001 issue of Science magazine announced the discovery of an electrically conductive layer under the Tibetan Plateau. The article suggested that such high conductivity, at depths of approximately 10 miles, could be achieved by a layer of aqueous fluids, some 1.6 kilometers thick and containing 10% brine. In other words, salt water.
Just how big these subterranean layers of water will turn out to be, no one really knows, but the article points out that the conductivity is evident across the entire Tibetan Plateau.
Recently, even more evidence to support Dr. Brown's theory became available. On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground 40 feet from where they were playing. The police were notified, and 48 hours later, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a clean room laboratory. What they discovered inside stunned them all. The meteorites contained salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. That's unlikely, because asteroids in the vacuum of space cannot sustain liquid water, which is required to form salt crystals. It's also too cold, and there's too little gravity. Earth is the only body in the solar system that can sustain liquid water on its surface. This demonstrates the enormous power of the subterranean supercritical water, the fountains of the great deep that launch water and rock fragments into orbit around the sun. These rock fragments are still returning to the Earth as meteorites. Meteorites contain Earth-like material, including many types of living but dormant bacteria. This means that meteorites and their bacteria didn't originate in the vacuum of space. Meteorites are literally tiny chunks of the Earth itself returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery. On the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia, they have created the world's deepest hole, extending to a depth of 7.5 miles. At this depth, what they expected to find was a layer of basalt, Earth's most common type of volcanic rock. What they actually discovered was something entirely different.
The hole didn't reach the basalt underlying the granite continents, but to everyone's surprise, they did reach hot, salty water flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified, but the hydroplate theory provides a simple explanation.
Did the springs of the great deep burst forth and flood the entire Earth, just as the Bible says? Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory offers us a plausible scientific explanation for how this may have happened. But is there something more important to this theory? Could it be yet another example of the supernatural engineering observed throughout the Bible? If we now know where the water of the Great Flood came from, the same water that was instrumental in forming the fossil record, then when the Great Flood receded, where did all the water go? The answer to that question not only bolsters the scientific theory that a worldwide flood actually took place, it also provides an alternative explanation for the formation of one of the world's greatest natural wonders.
This is the question that stops most scientific investigators dead in their tracks. Yet the hydroplate theory makes the answer obvious. As the hydroplates crashed, they thickened and rose out of the water, forcing the floodwaters over the continents to recede. Simultaneously, upward surging subterranean water was choked off. As the floodwater drained off the continents, every continental basin was left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. During the following centuries, some lakes breached their boundaries by either spilling over their rims or undercutting their banks. The rapid, catastrophic discharge of these lakes, much like the collapse of a large dam, carved canyons. Several centuries after the flood, two very large ancient lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake, sitting on top of the high, rising Colorado Plateau, breached their boundaries and carved the Grand Canyon in just a few weeks. The massive canyon was not carved by the relatively small Colorado River over millions of years. That river is a consequence of the carving of the Grand Canyon.
Can the residual waters of Noah's flood account for the amazing natural beauty of the Grand Canyon? If Dr. Brown's theory is correct, then the Grand Canyon was carved only a few thousand years ago, and nearly every geology textbook needs to be revised.
One has only to look at the Earth's anomalies to see that the hydroplate theory provides a far better explanation of the Earth's present condition than the other more prevalent, well-propagated, but highly implausible theories.
Were key geological markers, like the Grand Canyon, formed over millions of years? Or did they come to be within the short time frame of Noah's flood? The hydroplate theory, which supports the story of Noah's flood, says it was the latter. If that is true, what better example of supernatural engineering could one ask for?
For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse.
Romans 1:20 tells us that God's fingerprints are all over the creation. We see His handiwork everywhere, and the Grand Canyon is but one example of this, as we see evidence of the waters receding. This tells us that God is real and that He created all these things.
Supernatural engineering. We see it in the unified message of the Bible's 66 books. And as many scientists believe, we see it in the geological evidence left behind by the flood. But although our search for evidence of the worldwide flood has yielded some tantalizing results, this does not prove the story of Noah and the ark is true. Indeed, skeptics of the Bible often demand evidence set in stone. And as it turns out, science may be able to provide just that. Could it be that one of the cornerstones of Earth's geological history, the fossil record, also supports the story of a worldwide flood? And does it provide us with even more evidence of supernatural engineering in the history of man? And what about the ship at the center of the Noah story? Could it be that science might again lend a hand in establishing the possibility that an ark, such as the one described in the book of Genesis, might have actually existed? And if it were built to the specifications found in this ancient text, could it have withstood the pounding that a worldwide flood would undoubtedly bring? Or will the details of the story actually sink this ancient ship? And what about the hidden message contained in the Genesis account of Noah? Can it provide even more evidence of supernatural engineering? And how can the Bible shed light on the most difficult problems facing humanity today? Evolutionary geological science tells us a lot of things about the history of our planet. And at the heart of this discipline is what one might call the bedrock of this branch of science, the fossil record. According to the most widely accepted theory, the Earth is billions of years old, and the fossil record, which provides us with an archive of ancient life forms, took millions of years to create. But as evidence mounts for the truth behind the biblical account of Noah's flood, we must ask ourselves, is there a better explanation?
An obvious indicator that there was a global flood is the fact that we have sedimentary layers of rock, coal, deposition around the world. Now, in order to get these sedimentary layers, material has to be ripped apart, transported, has to be water-laid. Inside these sedimentary deposits, we have fossils. Now, fossils do not form under general atmospheric conditions. They require a very rapid, immediate burial in the deposition, free of free oxygen. Otherwise, they would biodegrade very rapidly.
But according to the most popular scientific theory, the fossil record was formed long before man came on the scene. How could this be true if the fossil record were formed after Noah's flood? Could it be that the prevailing scientific wisdom is wrong? And what if artifacts from human civilization had been found in places where, according to conventional science, they could not possibly exist?
If man-made artifacts could be found in the sedimentary deposits of the fossil record, then we have a real problem. Either man has been around for a long time, like hundreds of millions of years, or what we're taught in the textbooks are in error, and the entire deposition of that column is recent.
The Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas contains a number of items that point to the accuracy of the flood theory and leave mainstream scientific explanations high and dry. The most interesting item in the museum's collection is a hammer found partially encased in rock by a young woman in Texas.
Emma Hahn, in 1934, was checking out a piece of land that she and her husband had recently bought. In the immediate area, it is early Cretaceous, dating it by evolutionary assignment at about 140 million years. Well, now in this supposed 140 million year old concretion, she saw a stick. She pulled at the stick, pulling out the concretion, took it home. Her son chipped the top of it off, and to their absolute amazement, inside was a very sophisticated hammerhead with an eye, with a portion of the handle still intact.
The fossilized hammer is an intriguing piece of evidence, but does it provide evidence that the biblical story of Noah is true? When the museum came into possession of the hammer, Dr. Baugh decided to do some additional research on the rare find.
What the scientists have been intrigued about is the fact that when they seared through this charred material, it was shiny bright. That was 1934. To this date, long decades since, it is still shiny bright and is not rusted.
Considering the unique properties of the hammer, Dr. Baugh decided to test its metal, so to speak. He took the artifact to Battelle Laboratories, the same labs that analyzed the composition of rocks brought back from man's exploration of the moon. The results showed a highly unusual combination of 96% iron, 1% sulfur, and about 3% chlorine, which probably accounts for the hammer's strange ability to remain rust-free.
Here we have an enigma for the scientific community if evolution is true. On the other hand, if there was a more dense, specified, pre-flood atmosphere with greater atmospheric pressure, then this makes sense.
Was this hammer made prior to Noah's flood? Was it deposited in sediment and fossilized as a result of post-flood conditions? We may never know for sure, yet it seems to add another link in the chain of evidence to show that the flood did occur. Still, there are other details of the flood story that require a closer look if we are to verify the account. For example, the structure of the ship itself. According to the Old Testament scriptures, God gave Noah specific instructions on how to build the massive vessel that would save his family and the animals.
In Genesis chapter 6, God tells Noah to build an ark of wood, make rooms in it, and to pitch it both inside and outside. And what's also interesting is what comes next, the specific dimensions of the ark.
This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks.
With the dimensions of the ark given to them by God, the Bible tells us that Noah and his family set about the task of building the massive ship. But these same dimensions present a modern-day audience with yet another clue to be pursued. If the ark were to be recreated according to the biblical specifications, could it withstand the pounding of a catastrophic flood? Experts in the field have examined the Genesis account with surprising results.
The ark was a marvelously well-designed and constructed vessel. It would have to be to survive the turmoil of the flood. Experts have noted that the cross-section of the ark, they said it was 450 feet long or so by 75 feet wide and 45 feet high, that cross-section of the ark could tilt to any degree of tilt up to 90 degrees or so, and this righting couple of the two forces would tend to bring it back to right side up. It would be almost impossible to capsize. The length of the ark would keep the ark facing into the waves and not be hit broadside by some of these super waves. And so the ark had to be marvelously well designed.
With the ark's seaworthiness established, one of the most obvious questions about the plausibility of the Noah account has been answered. But there is another more difficult problem that must be addressed. How did Noah gather all the animals?
You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive.
Of all the details provided in the biblical story, the one that most delights children is the inclusion of the animals. But this same facet of the story also invites the most ridicule from skeptics. Given the size of the ark, it's impossible, they say, for Noah to have brought 2 of every kind of animal on board. Some have even calculated that God's command to Noah would have required him to carry some 50 million species on the great ship. But is this number accurate? Just how many animals, along with the provisions needed to feed them, could the ark have carried? In his book, Noah's Ark, A Feasibility Study, author John Woodmarappy has carefully examined every aspect of the Genesis account.
Well, most of these arguments are frivolous. They're just simply based on ignorance. They're not based on a thorough knowledge of such things as animal care, animal housing, things like that at all. People think there should be millions and millions of species of animals on the ark. Well, that is absolutely false. To begin with, the Bible clearly talks about land animals and air-breathing animals. So conservatively, we could say the level of the genus, not every variety of species. And so when you take both of these things into account, it comes out to about 16,000 animals. If you were to line up all 16,000 animals from the biggest to the smallest, of a parade of 16,000, from the biggest to the smallest, you find the 8,000th animal, most one median one right in the middle, would be about the size of a large rat, 200 grams. The vast majority of mammals are small, even more the vast majority of birds are small, and a majority of reptiles are small.
Another problem skeptics raise in relation to the ark's animal cargo concerns the amount of space on board. Would there have been enough room in the ark to house all the creatures? Modern-day calculations of the ark's size and volume have yielded an interesting fact. Based on the biblical measurements given, it's estimated that the ark had the same capacity as some 520 railroad stock cars. By some estimates, that would be enough space to hold more than 50,000 animals and birds, as well as food.
When you actually do a study on all these things that are involved, study animal housing, study how much space the animals need, study how long it would take to provide food and water for them and to dispose of their waste, study how much food and water they need. When you study all these things in detail, you find that the account of Noah's Ark is completely feasible.
With a growing body of evidence to support the validity of Noah's flood, Christians may well be asking themselves the question, how does this story relate to my life today? As it turns out, the Genesis account has never been more relevant, because there is yet another extraordinary example of supernatural engineering we find in the Noah account, one that has far-reaching implications for the future of humanity. It can be found in Genesis chapter 5. Here we discover the genealogy of Adam through Noah. Unfortunately, the long list of names and ages of Noah's ancestors is often overlooked or even regarded as irrelevant. But a closer examination reveals something truly amazing.
In our Bible, in Genesis chapter 5, we read the Hebrew names of Noah's ancestors. They're Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and finally Noah. Now, in the English transliteration of the Hebrew, that doesn't mean much to us. But if we look at the Hebrew terms, we can, from the Hebrew roots, determine what those names actually mean. Adam means man. Seth means appointed. You go through each of the names as to what they mean. It spells out a sentence. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Here, in the genealogy in the Torah, is a summary of the Christian gospel. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, whose death? God's death, shall bring man the despairing comfort or rest. We have the summary of the Christian gospel encrypted in the first genealogy in the Bible. What this message in Genesis demonstrates to us is that God's plan of redemption was not a knee-jerk reaction to Adam's failure. It was planned before the foundation of the world. Well, if God can lay out the plan of our redemption thousands of years before Christ goes to the cross, doesn't God also have the answers to our problems today?
Christians around the world believe and embrace the Bible as God's inspired word, and the Noah account gives us yet another example of just how miraculous this ancient book really is. But can it actually help mankind address the greatest problems facing humanity today? One need only watch the nightly news to get a feel for the gloomy mood of society and what many believe will be a bleak future. How can the Bible help us address these growing clouds on the horizon? And what does all of this have to do with the Noah account? Biblical scholars estimate that the worldwide flood event depicted in Genesis took place some 5,000 years ago. Yet today, the key component of the story is in the news again, because according to many people in the scientific community, our planet is in grave danger of another worldwide flood. But in this case, the cause of the catastrophe will be far from divine.
Seems like almost every time we turn on the television or see previews at the movies, there is talk of catastrophe, global warming, doomsday scenarios. Is this really a threat, though?
Are the threats of global warming real? And if they are, will there be another worldwide flood just as in the days of Noah? According to some experts, the predictions are dire and the time frame alarmingly short.
There are all these wild claims being made that global warming is going to melt the ice caps, the Greenland ice cap, the Antarctic ice cap. The sea level is going to rise like 20 feet, perhaps in the next 50 or 100 years, that will flood most of the major cities of the world, the coastal cities, New York, Los Angeles, San Diego, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., many of the other major cities of the world. There are a lot of people that are being almost put into panic about this. So the issue is there going to be another global flood?
Another frightening prediction involves some of the most destructive storms known to man, hurricanes. According to some scientists and politicians, global warming will warm the world's oceans, which will cause an increase in both storm frequency and deadliness. And that's not all. Deadly diseases, especially malaria, will spread across the globe and claim millions of victims. Time is running out, or at least that's what many scientists are telling us. And if some high-profile politicians are to be believed, global warming may well bring this doomsday scenario to pass within the next 100 years. Is the Earth once again destined for disaster, and will there be a repeat of Noah's worldwide flood? Or are there scientists who disagree with these dire predictions? And what does the Bible have to say about the future of mankind and the planet Earth?
Of course, man is contributing to some global warming, but the amount is probably not large, and no one really knows the extent. Those who argue that man is the sole cause of global warming have overlooked the key question. Why does the Earth have so much ice in the first place? 8 million cubic miles, most of it in Antarctica and Greenland.
While global warming is one of the top news headlines of the 21st century, consensus on its causes, severity, and ultimate effect on the Earth has not materialized. because the study of Earth's climate changes is one of the most difficult areas in which to make accurate predictions. And nothing illustrates this point better than the events that unfolded just a few decades ago when scientists were arguing over a very different doomsday scenario: global cooling. In the 1970s, a study by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, indicated a cooling trend between 1945 and 1968. The result was a drop of 0.5 degree in average ground temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere. In the early 70s, satellite photos indicated a large increase in Northern Hemisphere snow cover. And NOAA scientists noted that the amount of sunshine reaching the ground in the continental U.S. diminished by 1.3% between 1964 and 1972. Their conclusion? Global cooling was turning into a serious problem.
There are ominous signs that the Earth's weather patterns have begun to change dramatically, and that these changes may portend a drastic decline in food production, with serious political implications for just about every nation on Earth.
Worldwide famine resulting in wars perpetrated by the most populous nations with starving populations. These were the predictions of reputable scientists in the 1970s, and the story was carried by news organizations around the world. But did the much publicized catastrophic results of global cooling materialize? No. Of course, past misinterpretations don't necessarily mean we should write off the global warming scare of today as pure hype. Yet there are many scientists who strongly disagree with the alarms that are currently being sounded. Many of these experts believe the warming trend we see on Earth today is simply a natural phenomenon. They point to evidence of a predictable cycle of warming and cooling. But even if we assume there is a predictable cycle, what about the temperature of the Earth today? Are the climate changes we're seeing now within the normal range of Earth's previous pattern?
It appears that we are in a period of warming that began about 1800, accelerated during the 20th century, and that we're about a degree warmer than we were 100 years ago. But this amount of warming is within the range of the warming and cooling that has occurred several times since the flood. One example of another warm period was the period from about 900 AD to 1300 AD. During that time, the Vikings colonized Greenland. There was abundant farming there, grasslands, herds, even vineyards in Greenland. And so this current warming is not out of that range. It's within the range that has been experienced by humans over the last few millennia.
If the Earth has shown a pattern of warming cycles in the past, then have scientists been able to determine the source of the warming? The answer, according to some experts, is about as natural as you can get.
Recent research has discovered a strong connection with solar activity, magnetic activity on the sun. There seems to be a connection with the amount of solar activity on the sun and the average temperature of the Earth's surface. And right now, solar activity is high. There are fewer cosmic rays reaching into the atmosphere, and as a result, less clouds and higher temperatures. Many people are concluding that this is a much stronger driving force mechanism than is the burning of fossil fuel.
If as much as half of the scientific community disagrees with the dire predictions of the pro-global warming crowd, then where does the ultimate truth about Earth's future lie? Christians believe there is only one source that can provide accurate information about the future of humanity and the planet we live on. That source is the Bible. So what does the Bible have to tell us about what lies ahead? Will the world end with another global flood? Some in the scientific community fear just such a scenario, while others, as we've seen, cite evidence to the contrary. So where does the Bible weigh in on this issue? Speaking in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus had this to say about Earth's final days.
As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away.
What the Bible makes clear is that, as in Noah's day, people will be oblivious to the impending judgment he's going to bring. But what we do also know from the Bible is that it won't come as a flood.
And that was God's final promise to Noah. As we've seen, God has a plan, and He communicates that plan in the Bible. And as we begin to understand that plan, the Bible gives us many clues as to what to expect next.
Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it, and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth.
With every rainbow that appears in the sky, mankind can take comfort in the fact that God has promised never to flood the world again. For a growing number of people in the scientific community, there is no doubt that a worldwide flood occurred in the past. But will absolute proof of this ancient deluge, especially in the form of the remains of Noah's Ark, ever be found? If it were to be discovered, what would it mean to the world today?
If Noah's Ark was actually discovered on Mount Ararat, that would have enormous impact on the academic community, but it would simply confirm what archaeologists have been doing now for about 200 years. And that is finding that what the Bible teaches is true.
Such a discovery would help confirm many of the scriptural accounts, which many skeptics have put into the realm of myths and fables. And remember what the editor of National Geographic said to us, who said it far better than I can. If the Ark of Noah is ever discovered, it would be the greatest archaeological find in human history, the greatest event since the resurrection of Christ, and it would alter all the currents of scientific thought.
Of course, the discovery of Noah's Ark would have monumental spiritual implications as well. For if the world were convinced that the Ark had been found, they would have to admit the biblical truth behind the Noah story. That would undoubtedly leave them wanting to know more. So what exactly does the Bible say about the future of the world?
This is the same pattern we see over and over in the Bible, starting with the story of Noah and the Great Flood. And it continues all the way to the end of the book in the stories of the biblical prophecies. This same pattern repeats itself. The pattern is this: people rebel. Then God warns, but He gives an opportunity for safety. Some respond to Him and believe, and they're safe. Others refuse to, and they're judged. In the flood story, God warned Noah and told him a flood would be coming, but He gave him 120 years. He gave them all 120 years to respond to God's truth before He even sent the flood. This period, grace period of 120 years, was a time frame in which people would have known about the ark and why it was being built. In fact, Noah and his family would have tried to get other people to join in with them so their lives would have been saved. But there were no takers. So God kept His promise and sent judgment on a very violent world. But He gave the ark, He sent the ark specifically for the purpose of being a place of safety, of salvation for all who would come to Him. The ark was kind of a picture of what was to come. It was like an hors d'oeuvres before the main course. It was a cameo or a snapshot of what was to come in the person of Jesus Christ, in His death and His resurrection. That would become the ark of safety, salvation for us all. But just as in the days of Noah, this grace period we're experiencing now will not last forever. It is God's desire that not one single person perish. We're told that a day of judgment is coming, but this time the earth will not be destroyed by a flood, it will be destroyed by fire.
Long ago, by God's word, the heavens existed and the earth was formed out of water and with water. By water also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and the destruction of ungodly men.
The judgment by fire that Peter refers to in his second letter, many people think is going to come about through a nuclear holocaust that will bring a purging effect on the earth and mankind. Other people think this judgment may come about through volcanic activity or an asteroid colliding with the earth. However God chooses to bring about this final judgment by fire, what we do know is that it will bring an end once and for all to the constant cycle we see throughout biblical history of human rebellion and God restoring human beings to a relationship with Him, to the point where finally the earth will see restoration once and for all, where God will live with His people.
One of the most important passages in Scripture that deals with the flood is in 2 Peter chapter 3. It says that in the last days people will be denying the reality of Noah's flood, but the very next few verses talk about the annihilation of this planet Earth, that there'll be a new heavens and a new earth where righteousness can dwell once again. Just as God planned the original earth to be a perfect, very good earth, and man and God in perfect fellowship and harmony, and there'd be no pain, no suffering, no death, so the coming new earth will enjoy that same environment. We'll be in perfect relationship and fellowship with our Creator.
It is extremely important we understand the pattern in the Bible. By recognizing this pattern, we can see where we fall right now in the timeline of God's plan and what He plans to do next and how we are to respond. It's laid out in the Bible if we will invest the energy to seek it out and study it.
Perhaps one of the greatest potential impacts of the discovery of Noah's Ark would be in a more personal realm, the realm of salvation, because if you recognize what the Bible is talking about, the Bible says that Noah's flood was a judgment of sin, but God in His grace had Noah build the ark as a means by which the believers out of a previous civilization could escape that coming judgment and be placed in a new and better world afterwards. The exact same situation faces us today. God looks down on this civilization, sees again a rampant, sinful, violent world, and He promises judgment. The wages of sin is still death, and there is a judgment coming, not by water this time, but a judgment nonetheless. And yet in His grace, God has given us an ark of salvation, Jesus Christ. If we climb aboard that ark, if we recognize that His death paid the penalty for our sins, we can be forgiven of our sins and have adoption into His family and have eternal life. This is the real message of Noah's Ark.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Now the dwelling of God is with men, and He will live with them."
Will the remains of Noah's Ark ever be found? Perhaps. But in the end, physical proof of the Ark's existence shouldn't really matter. Instead, we must focus on what the Ark represents, a means of salvation. Salvation that found its perfect fulfillment in one man, Jesus Christ. The ultimate question for the world, then, is simple. Will we be like the people in the days of Noah who refused to come into the ark until it was too late? Or will we respond to God's call? As of today, it is not too late.